finish up this particular chapter, when we have memories get formed using the higher order brain centers, sensory information becomes important. So a huge portion of that cerebrum, the large portion, is concerned with our senses. We saw temporal lobe, parietal, occipital, frontal, and we're going to see that we have an area that's going to be very concerned about sensations of our body. So we say this is our primary sensory cortex, an area for the sensory information coming in. Okay? So we're going to have association areas, and it allows the brain to make sense of stimuli. For example, the amount of light, the heat, the information that we don't necessarily have to stay aware of. Our special senses that play a huge role in this sensory intake of information, they are limited to our head because they are going to be associated with our cranial nerves.
For the primary sensory cortex, are we talking about all of the cerebrum, or are we talking about a specific building?
All right. We're going to have a specific area of the brain. So when we say that we have a primary sensory cortex, we're going to have an area of the brain that deals with that, and we're going to have a association area, and we're going to deal with the information coming in. But if I have to deal with the information coming in a primary sensory cortex, and I got to deal with something going out, I'm going to have a primary motor cortex. So if we're looking at the brain, all right, did I point out the two prominent gyri when we had the brains out? Did I point those out? Okay, because that sulci that looks like it's going all the way across on both sides, there's this really huge prominent gyri on each side. All right, got one here and one here, okay? Those gyri coming down the side of the sulci, Note, I've got one that they're trying to label in purple, telling me sensory. I've got the one in blue telling me motor. It's dealing with, for the sensory, it's dealing with sensory information from all over that can come in. Okay, is everybody with me? So, I have to have an association area. They're trying to represent it here in that purplish color. Associating these stimuli that are coming in. If I have sensory information come in, I got to have motor go out. Okay? So, I have a motor cortex, and that has its association area. Other parts that become important in the function of these higher order activities. I have an area of the brain called the Broca language. Okay? My prefrontal cortex. Remember how I kept trying to point right here? Okay? This right here, olfactory. Do you know what olfactory means? Smell. I have an area for smell. Auditory. What is that?
Hearing.
I've got an area in my temporal lobe for hearing. I have a cortex for that. Once again, temporal lobe. Vision. Well, where we would expect it to be, which is in the occipital, and I have an association area. That is how this brain, oh, and don't forget Wernicke and taste, because Wernicke and Broca are going to be associated with speech. All this information coming in. If we look sensory and motor coming in, because we'll get to special senses in a later chapter. General sensation is the entire body. Okay? So, I gotta have, from that sulci that was very prominent, I got these two gyri that will help me deal with sensory information coming in and motor information that needs to go out. So, information gets to come in, the brain gets to send it where it needs to go, because we have our thalamus. Now, in the case of my higher brain function, thalamus sends incoming sensory to that gyri. And don't let it exists on both sides, right and left, okay? So, if I have my association area for sensory information, I'm going to hopefully get to make sense of it, all right, and create my response. Now, that association area should help with that, and look what happens. If you go back to the picture of the projection tracks, they decussate. So information, for the most part, information dealing with our body and all this sensory information, yes, for the most part, the left side controls the right side controls the left. They decussate for information. So, we say that information that comes in and goes out, for the body, some information is paid attention to more than others. If our body parts matched the information that's paid attention to, our bodies would look very odd. Because in certain parts of the body, there's more information getting picked up than others. So, based on these gyri that are dealing with either the sensory or the motor, okay, this right here is called my homunculus. That simply means tiny man, okay? And it's showing how much of that gyri, the cortex of it, How much of that space is being used for these areas of my body? So if I look at my sensory gyri, okay, look at how much of the space is being utilized for just the head. Very little is left for the rest of the body. A huge portion is given to our hands, very little to the arms, shoulder, neck, trunk, hip, thigh, leg, quite a bit to the toes, okay? The majority is going to the head, the hands, and the feet. So, what that is telling us, you have a ton of sensory stimuli being picked up from these areas of the body. The rest of the areas, the brain's not that concerned about. It's not concerned about having fine touch from your shoulders down your back. Okay? Just like I have all these parts, that much being dedicated to these parts of the body for sensory information, I got the same thing for motor. A little bit different. But I have a homunculus because the motor control, take that sensory, determine what we need to do. Because this is voluntary. So we have the sensory come in, we have it go to the areas of the brain that will process it. A lot of times frontal, because it is voluntary. Therefore, we plan our behavior because that's what we do in the frontal lobe. The program that got created now goes to the pre-central, this huge gyrus to the front of that sulci, because that's my motor area. So once we get to the motor area, we can send those commands to areas of the brainstem and spinal cord so that we can carry out an activity. Just like we had the homunculus for sensory, we have it for motor. But once again, what do you note about the area or this, how much of that gyri is dedicated to areas of the body? So if our body was shaped the way that the brain pays attention to it, we'd have really big heads, really big tongues, really big hands. We'd have very toothpick-like legs with big feet, okay? A short body, not a lot of back and front, and that it would look very odd based on what the brain pays attention to. So they refer to these areas, the pre and the post, where we've got sensory coming in, we get sense of that information, and we carry out a response, and both sides, left does control right, right does control left. Language. I showed or pointed out the Wernicke and the Broca area of the brain. Language is reading, writing, speaking, sign language, and being able to understand the words. I speak one language, that's it. Okay? Anybody in here speak more than one? Okay? And that's an ability that I don't have. I wish I did. Okay, I've thought about trying that Babel thing or whatever, but I don't do that. I understand the one. But we know, for example, sign language